Every day, you essentially pay your dues by doing the harder thing when it's the right thing to do.
College athletics is a job, and it should be treated like that. And you are responsible for fueling your body and taking care of it. And I think tragically, some of the stuff that goes on is more of just the end result of years of overtraining and underfueling and just stuff that's really tough to kind of deal with. But yeah, I think, can you do your skills or not? Can you perform or not? And if we can't, then let's reach out to the experts, right? Let's check in on nutrition. Let's check in on mental health. Let's get all the right, PT, strength, conditioning, orthopedic professionals involved and really do our due diligence here, instead of just saying, well, if your lower half was lighter, you double flip better. Like that's not helpful to anyone.
And also along with that, I think the thing that still is very much, unfortunately, a myth in the culture that has literally zero science behind it is like, particularly in the world I'm studying, right? Like Achilles tears, ACL tears, stuff like that. They're like, so many people are just like, well, that freshman 15, if they just lost, if they didn't gain so much weight when they came into preseason, they wouldn't have torn their Achilles. They wouldn't have torn their ACL. They wouldn't have had a back problem. And it's like, show me any data that reflects that. Literally, show me any data in the empirical evidence body that says, if you gain that weight, that's why you tear your Achilles. And as someone who has spent a lot of time in that research and has just finished a study with Ellen doing that, BMI was not a risk factor for Achilles ruptures in the 600 current college gymnasts that we assessed. So it's like, before you start slinging mud like that and making accusations, you got to think about volume in JO. You got to think about elite skills they did when they were younger, hard tumbling passes. How young were they? Like, what was their nutrition like when they were going through puberty, developing their collagen? Like, I don't have the answers right now because we don't have, prospective studies that are really high quality, but like, I'm pretty sure that you can't just say one thing definitively caused that, similarly to how you can't say it was the 10 pounds that made you not catch it.
I mean, I do think a lot of college gymnasts do put on weight when they transition and in that first year or two. And I think there's several reasons behind that. I think the first reason is just natural growth and development. And, think about how many elite level gymnasts, high level JO gymnasts, females, they don't start their menstrual cycle until they are like 18 or 19. I mean, that is like 4 or 5 years late. And so why wouldn't their bodies gain fat mass and eventually put down muscle mass and go through those same, honestly, kind of awkward middle school year transitions just 5 years too late, And tragically, coaches and parents and a lot of doctors think it's not a problem. Like they think that, oh, it's fine. You're a gymnast. You'll get your period when you stop, or it's just a lot of exercise, but you're fine. And it's like, you're not fine because, if the body doesn't have enough energy to support a baby, it doesn't have enough energy to repair and recover, much less actually like adapt to training. And I think there's a lot of really hardcore, like down-regulating kind of survival mechanisms that kick in. But then often we have this complete like overshoot that happens. And I talk about this all the time, when we're looking at kind of average weight gain between 9 to 12 years old, we expect at least 5 pounds a year, up to 10 pounds, some years it's going to be, variable, probably 2.5, 3 inches of height per year. And just stop right there. Like think about how many 11, 12, and 13-year-old high-level gymnasts we have that don't grow, right? Like they're not growing. And if you look at their growth charts, we've just completely flatlined. And if we haven't flatlined, we've definitely fallen off the curve. And to the untrained eye, you might think it looks fine, but you always have to think ahead and take into account that these athletes should have a higher weight than you might expect because of muscle, right? Like 5 pounds of muscle, 5 pounds of fat, both the same, but for a high level gymnast, she's going to have a lot more muscle density that's going to translate to more weight on the scale compared to the same size, same age, peer. So, I think that right there, and then coupled with the 40 plus pounds that you gain as a female in adolescence, which again is normal and expected, when that gets suppressed for years and years and years, when there is a break in training like COVID, or like when high level gymnasts transition to college and maybe they have time off, or they're injured, or it's just different, like more efficient, kind of less numbers. We often do see kind of this swing to the other end that is very much out of their control. And the only way to get through it is to fuel through it. And that might be a year or two of awkward being at a higher body fat than you want or is culturally, socially acceptable. But that is just part of what happens with, what we're going to talk more about of the whole metabolic adaptation and this, body fat overshoot is the body is trying to defend and protect and keep itself alive.
But so many young gymnasts are overtrained and underfueled and underfed when they're developing, that their body is just not growing well, not growing muscle mass well, not developing bone and collagen. So that we see so many injuries because of that, right? But what I see happen is somebody goes, is underfed, like I said, and overtraining. So their body is blunting, right? And like a protective mechanism, because stress, and this is a geeky tangent that nobody probably cares about, but stress in the proper dosage is good, right? It auto-regulates your body, but chronic low-level stress is not what we're designed for. And there's a million possible systems we could talk about. But one of the things that happens is your body, doesn't put down growth and doesn't put down new tissue because it's like surviving, the chronic low-level stress. So high training loads, high training hours, really high intensity, pressure emotionally, that's chronic stress on a young kid. And so what happens is you're not developing the muscle and the stuff you need. You get hurt, say you tear your ACL, say you get a hip injury. So you take that break in training and you probably don't change anything about your nutritional habits. You would probably say from your clients, people eat less because they're scared to gain weight. And what happens is they just normally grow. They normally go through like a puberty spurt or an optimal development or something, and they gain normal, healthy human muscle development and math. They become a woman, right? And like, what is the first thing you hear about? Like, oh, you got to stop eating. Like, oh, that break is really doing it. And people completely chastise that person for nothing they have control out of. And so what happens? We spiral down the hole of, well, my coach thinks I'm fat or is insinuating that I'm fat. And this is not like facade making it up. I literally have people who have said, I'm not going back to my gym in PT because they're going to call me fat, or they're going to suggest somehow that I'm overweight. And it's like, it's just normal biology. And I think this is what also happens going to college, right? And I think that we train so hard, so aggressively when they're young. They go to college, they go from 25 to 30 hours. They change their schedule where it's 20 hours. They have a life, they have much different stuff. And they normally grow because it's been so delayed because they probably have undiagnosed red S. And so
I have a lot of gymnasts I work with that, they're training 25, 30 hours a week. And you look at them and coaches look at them and they look at themselves and they're like, why am I not leaner? Like, why am I not totally shredded for as much as I'm doing? And even sometimes in the face, you can see this like almost puffiness that in my mind is like 100% a stress response. And then the interesting thing is a lot of these high level gymnasts, when they do retire, they change nothing and their weight settles to like genetically where it was going to be, which for many of them, not all of them, but for many of them is like 10 or 15 pounds lower. And people are like, oh my gosh, how do I look better now than I did when I was, a collegiate athlete? And I'm like, well, you probably are fueling your body better now because there's like no comments and no pressure and you're not over exercising. You aren't just overdoing everything. Like your total allostatic load is finally lower and your body's finally out of fight or flight mode. Like it's finally able to just chill and calm down. Like there's no way to diet without consequence. And what this paper talks about is that the actual adaptation, the down regulation to your metabolism. So, let's say at rest, you needed 1,800 calories just to lie in bed all day. And you embarked on this diet to get leaner or get shredded or whatever. And through losing fat mass and muscle mass, I mean, you're going to lose both no matter how well you strength train and try to keep it. Now, maybe you need 1,700 calories. Or maybe it's like 1,650 or 1,600. And a lot of that research is also in a paper by Kevin Hall, like the whole Biggest Loser study shows this exact concept of like their metabolism is not the same as it was. And often it restores, and especially for younger athletes, like the sooner we can get out of the deficit, the sooner we can like recovery diet or get them back, like the metabolism will pick back up and it will recognize like, oh yeah, we can handle, adequate calories to support life and to support everything else. But the longer you spend, so when we're looking at college athletes who have not gotten out of the deficit, like we've been underfueled for years and years and years, there are serious changes that happen to, appetite hormones, to kind of fat storage signaling, usage of energy, kind of like you talked about. The body will store more calories from a meal when someone is in this bad place versus someone with a really robust kind of healthy metabolism. And I think that right there is just deceiving, and why, even if you count all the calories in the world and macromanage your weight, there still could be changes that happen that you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know what's going on. And if you voice them, a lot of people would say, well, you're just lying. Like, you're just eating more than you think you are. And I think that sometimes happens because, of course, along this adaptation, you get hungrier because you've lost fat mass, you've lost muscle mass. And so the brain interprets that as starvation. So it's going to do its best to get your attention, and it's going to get you to try to eat and get itself restored back to your body's kind of homeostatic settling point. But, because of that, I think then we get into sometimes the whole binge restrict cycle and this hyperphagia. Like, the body is hungry and it's trying to get you to survive. So kind of too long didn't read is like, the less time in a deficit, the better. Yeah. I mean, I think, before you even work with someone, I think you can step back and evaluate, like, do you feel like you're able to eat enough and not think about food all day? So many gymnasts that come to me, they're like, yeah, all day I'm thinking about food. I eat breakfast, I'm thinking about lunch, I eat lunch, I'm thinking about dinner. And I'm like, yeah, that's the sign of a starved brain, which again goes back to that like evolutionary mechanism of, your body's on the alert. Anytime a wild animal comes by, you got to be ready to kill it and eat, because your body doesn't know when the next food source is available. So I think that's number one, is just how is kind of our overall thought life, our relationship with food. Do we feel like we can eat all foods? Is there guilt? Is there shame? I think a big one is anytime you take time off from the gym, whether it's injury or like vacation, if you feel like you gain 1,000,000 pounds, like that's kind of your sign that, oh, we need to look at nutrition, and we're probably in a deficit, we're probably under fueling, and there really shouldn't be this huge variation, whether it's variation from like binging and total loss of control when you're not as under pressure, or just this like hyperphagia, I finally can eat kind of mechanism. I think sleep is another really interesting one. And I will often see disrupted sleep in my gymnasts when they're underfed. I had one this week, an elite that is like, yeah, I just bumped up my melatonin dose. I'm having a hard time, totally exhausted throughout the day. And I, calculated nutrition, and this kid's eating like maybe 1,400 calories and training 30 hours a week. And I was like, this is your brain on the alert, right? Like cavemen, like you're not going to sleep well at night if you're on the hunt for food. Like your brain's going to stay alert at this level versus being fed and out of kind of fight or flight and able to rest and digest. And so I said, you know what? I think one of the benefits to increasing your nutrition to not only feel better in the gym, but I think you're going to sleep better, which then of course impacts repair and recovery, and just everything is going to go better. So I think if you have any of those signs to begin with, like if you're really petering out through the middle of practice or towards the end of practice, if you're constantly sore, I think you can look at your own nutrition. And then if we really are stuck and kind of in our head about it and having a hard time with body image, then yes, that's where we reach out to professionals and get that support. And if it's hard, that's understandable, right? Because we live in diet culture, and we live in a culture that, thinner is better and less is more. And, people think they need obscenely low amounts of calories because that's just what's projected, and every influencer ever says they eat. And it makes it really hard to know what's right, or to even know if there is a problem. This is a super, super great one by an author named Dulu. And essentially it outlines the concept of like weight dysregulation and body fat overshoot. And essentially this is a process where excess fat is deposited as a result of the body's attempt to counteract loss of lean mass, often through, some increase in calories, often through, overeating, kind of hyperphagia driven behavior. And I mean, this is, I think, the perfect paper for those college gymnasts, especially those who come from the elite world. And in their first year or two, they do gain 15, 20, 30 pounds. And what they need to know is that this is your body's biological response to starvation. Like this is your body trying to catch up, and you have to put down a certain amount of fat mass before lean mass will be put down. And there's only one way, and it's through. And this is hard. This is really hard. And trying to convince, a high level athlete that they need to continue eating adequately, even when their body's changed and they're uncomfortable, is like probably one of the toughest parts of my job. And a lot will jump ship, but if you jump ship, you never will get to this optimal body composition. Like you can't get lean, you can't get to this optimal body comp and optimal strength and power if you're underfueled. And I think especially gymnasts who have been underfueled for a long time, this is a very, very strong kind of counter response. And I had an elite rhythmic gymnast that I was working with just this week, and I was plotting her growth charts, and at 18, 19 years old, she was 5'8" and like 115 pounds and was literally eating next to nothing and running 6 miles a day and just continually told she was too fat.
Jesus.
And when she retired, she gained like a solid 50 or 60 pounds. And it's been hard. It's psychologically been really hard. And we looked at our growth charts together, and it's like, actually this weight for you, which is different than body comp, but at least this weight, to speak generally, actually plots pretty appropriately with where your body wanted to be. Would you weigh this much or have this much body fat if you hadn't been underfueled for so long? Probably not. And that's like the lesson for young gymnasts and parents of young gymnasts, is like, to prevent these struggles in college and post-puberty and in high school, we have to fuel adequately from the get-go so that the body doesn't think it's being starved. But it gets better. That's where like you first start with, what do I need? Like, okay, 3 foundational meals a day. The dining halls, the training tables typically are open during those times, and often very accommodating for athletes who have, really early practices, 2-a-days, that kind of thing. So I think, being proactive, getting your class schedule, adding in your workout schedule, adding in your lift schedule, and kind of laying it all out for yourself and seeing like, okay, where are these pockets that I can like foundationally nourish myself? And if that means like having a fridge and a microwave in your dorm and having breakfast in your room as you're getting ready, because that's just what's going to be realistic for you, that's awesome. Like, highly recommend. If that means having snack stuff, say you've got morning lift, like we still need some fuel before that. Let's have a good pre-workout carb protein snack, go lift. And then you and your teammates, go to the training table and have breakfast together. And, we need a meal probably every 4 to 5 hours. Snacks kind of bridge the gap between that. And also, making sure we understand like fueling our workouts, fueling adequately in and around the workouts, because not only will that benefit performance and recovery, but that's also huge for body comp. We know that like within day energy balance, having adequate nutrition, throughout the day versus like starving all day, kind of eating all night, even if you ate the same amount of calories, you will have a better body comp if you are well fueled throughout the day. And I think a lot of college kids get off on the wrong foot by, they wake up late, they oversleep, they're not hungry. And then that just starts us on this spiral of, then we get too hungry and then we can't eat and then we're in class, and you got to wrap your head around, like you got to fit it in when you can, especially if, practice is at 4. Like you can't show up to practice with 1 meal in your system from 7 a.m. to 4. Like that's just a recipe for a disaster. So I think having a planner, whether that's like in your phone, like a scheduling app, your calendar, or if you're like, good old paper version. Sadly, I think a lot of college athletes, because like clubs, school, like was managed by parents, like there's just a lot of support that needed to be there, but they never quite got that transition, that independence. They show up to college and have zero skills or idea of like, how do I plan this? How do I feed myself? And what do I do when, Monday, Wednesday, Friday is different than Tuesday, Thursday. And then the weekends, the dining hall is closed for dinner. So what do I do? Oh, I just won't eat. So I think a lot goes into really just simple planning skills. I think finding friends, going to meals with some friends or some teammates, like you're going to have a hard time if you're just eating by yourself every day. And it's hard if your teammates have different schedules than you, and you might have to make some other friends. But I think all of that is a really good place to start.